Information discussed in this podcast may be sensitive in nature to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Amber Elizabeth Cates was 16 years old in 2004. She should have been spending her days shopping at the mall with friends, listening to Justin Timberlake, Beyonce, or maybe even Taylor Swift. But by 16 years old, Amber had already had a bit of a troubled background, and she was known to be now hanging out with some older, maybe not so great people. In April, Amber was living with her older sister, and her sister was hopeful that she would be able to help Amber get back on track. That April, Amber planned to visit some relatives for spring break. Her sister knew this. This was the plan. So on April 11th, 2004, she took Amber to their mother's house and dropped her off. That afternoon, a man, a friend, or maybe even a boyfriend, picked her up and left. As time went on, it was realized that Amber never made it to where she was supposed to be going for spring break, and no one could reach her or find her anywhere. Her possible boyfriend said he dropped her off with someone else. That man said he dropped her off with friends. From there, Amber Cates vanished into thin air. Authorities weren't too quick to investigate at first. Amber did have a bit of a troubled past, and they classified her as an endangered runaway, believing that she had likely just ran away. But something wasn't adding up, and Amber's sister was determined to find her and get to the bottom of things. To date, Amber is still missing. Where is Amber Elizabeth Cates? Hello, and welcome back to the Where Are They podcast and another unsolved missing persons story. I found Amber's case while reading through case files in Tennessee, and I knew that despite the real lack of information in her story, I knew that I had to talk about her case. We don't have a whole lot of information on Amber's childhood. And while there has been some speculation about what that entailed, that's all it seems to be is wild speculation. So for the sake of telling Amber's story, we are going to start in 2004 with what we do know instead of possibly spreading more untruths or rumors. In 2004, we know that Amber was living with her older sister, Brenda, who was serving as Amber's legal guardian. Brenda and Amber's father had passed away, and Brenda had promised her dad that she would look out for Amber and take care of her. This was one of his dying wishes, and Brenda was going to honor that. Amber was 16 years old at the time, and she had been spreading her wings, possibly getting involved with a troubled crowd. But Brenda was hopeful that Amber would get back on track soon. She knew her sister was a good person. She had a good heart, and they could get Amber back to where she needed to be. And by all accounts, Amber seemed to be doing well and possibly heading in the right direction. In April of 2004, Amber planned on spending her spring break that year with relatives. On April 11th, Brenda drove Amber, who didn't yet have her driver's license or a car, to her mother's house where she dropped her off. That afternoon, Amber's friend James pulled up in his gold Mazda and picked Amber up. It would be a few days before Amber would be reported missing. She had never shown up at the relative's house as planned, and no one could find her. Authorities, knowing that Amber had a history, labeled her as an endangered runaway, and they weren't too quick to jump on her case or investigate or even search for Amber. But her family was not going to sit by. This time was different. There was no reason for Amber to take off. There was no reason for her to cut off communication with the family. And there was no reason for Amber to be out of touch at all. Something was very wrong. Her family began retracing her steps. They learned that James had picked her up at her mother's house. James told them he dropped her off with another man, a man named Ronald, and they were supposed to be going over to the Waffle House. Now, it would be some time before this Ronald was finally tracked down, and when he was, it would be the authorities that found him locked up in an Alabama prison. Ronald told law enforcement that, yeah, he did get Amber that day, and he dropped her off with friends at a garage that they were all known to hang out at. And that was the last time he saw her. From there, the trail seems to go cold. Detectives did confirm that the last confirmed sighting of Amber was at a construction site office with her friends, possibly that garage where Ronald said that he had dropped her off at. So law enforcement eventually did bring cadaver and scent working dogs to search that area, but nothing was uncovered. The FBI eventually was brought in, and a $25,000 reward was offered for information leading to finding Amber. So sightings and tips start coming in. People reported seeing her in Memphis, Tennessee, and Florida and Colorado, and really all over the United States. But none of those sightings were ever confirmed to be Amber. In 2017, frustrated with the lack of any information that she had received over the last 13 years, Amber's sister Brenda hired a private investigator. She had been determined to find her sister, even though so many years had gone by. There isn't a whole lot of information about what might have been uncovered with that investigator, but you can follow for more information from her family's efforts on the case at the Facebook page they have set up titled Bring Amber Elizabeth Cates Home. Amber's case would sadly go cold until March of 2024, when authorities announced that they had uncovered a major new lead and they were sending evidence to the lab for processing. What exactly that was or what that meant, we aren't sure. Law enforcement has kept that information close to the vest. However, they were very forthcoming in making that announcement, doing a press release, and getting the word out through the media that they had this big potential break in the case. Of course, here we are a year later, and there's still no news as to what that lead was or what, if anything, ever became of it. Columbia, Tennessee is a mid-sized city just south of Nashville. It is generally considered part of the Nashville metropolitan area, although it is about an hour's drive between the two. Columbia has a population of just around 47,000 residents. Within the city flows the Duck River, one of Tennessee's most scenic riverways. This river is popular with fishermen, kayakers, and visitors who just want to enjoy the peaceful scenery. The Duck River is 290 miles long and is the longest Tennessee river to be completely contained within the state's boundaries. Now, it seems that foul play or human trafficking are the two theories that authorities are leaning towards in the case of Amber Cates. So curiously, I did a little research on human trafficking in Tennessee, but I do want to note that regardless of what these numbers say, human trafficking can and does happen everywhere. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, also known as the TBI, has an outreach program dedicated solely to combating human trafficking and providing resources to their citizens. On their website, ithastostop.com, which is a fantastic resource, they have listed some pretty alarming statistics, such as 85% of Tennessee counties have reported at least one case of sex trafficking in the last 24 months. 4 counties, including Davidson, Knox, Coffee, and Shelby, reported over 100 cases in the last 24 months. These are confirmed human trafficking or sex trafficking crimes. Amber was known to socialize with a troubled crowd. She was 16. She was vulnerable. Did one of them possibly lead her down the wrong path? Or did they maybe introduce her to someone else who did? What do you think happened to Amber Elizabeth Cates back in April of 2004? Amber is described as a Caucasian female, standing 5 foot 5 inches tall and weighing around 100 pounds when she was last seen on April 11th, 2004. She was just 16 years old. Amber has light brown hair, but often dyes it blonde, and she has hazel eyes. It was not known what she might have been wearing on the day she vanished. Anyone with any information is asked to contact the Maury County Sheriff's Department at 931-380-5733. Unfortunately, we don't have any additional information about Amber or her case, or James and Ronald, the 2 people associated with her story. But I do encourage you to find the Facebook page and follow it for any updates and just to show your support for the family. Amber has been missing for far too long, and her family, especially her sisters, deserve answers. Latrice Armstead knew she had to escape a dangerous relationship, not just for herself, but mostly because of her 3 young sons. Her marriage to Tony Bledsoe had become violent, so violent in fact that the last time he had beaten up on her, he had broken her jaw. It was then that Latrice decided to pack up and move with her boys and go stay with family in St. Louis, Missouri. Her move was almost complete, but Latrice had to travel back to Memphis, Tennessee to pick up her youngest son on July 28, 2012. By that evening, her family was beginning to worry that they hadn't heard back from her. July 29, 2012 went by also with no contact from Latrice. By July 30th, the next day, her family made the decision to contact the local police department and report Latrice as missing. Latrice Armstead had disappeared. Searches for Latrice were futile, and fears were heightened when Latrice's car was found abandoned and burned in Clarksdale, Mississippi. There was still no sign of this mother of 3 anywhere. Where is Latrice Shay Armstead? Hello, and welcome to the Where Are They podcast in a bonus episode, another unsolved missing persons case. Latrice's story is heartbreaking, especially considering the 3 young boys she left behind, boys who continue to ask for their mother every single day. Trigger warning, this story does involve some domestic violence. If that is a triggering or sensitive topic for you, this episode might not be for you. Latrice Shay Armstead was born on November 2nd, 1973. Latrice grew up in Crenshaw, Mississippi with her family, including siblings that she maintained a close relationship with even into adulthood. I do want to mention, it seemed that Latrice often went by her middle name of Shay, but I'm going to call her Latrice for purposes of this story and keeping it straight. But I think it's important to mention that it seems like family and very close friends mostly or commonly referred to her as Shay. As an adult, Latrice went on to marry a man by the name of Tony Bledsoe, and they would go on to have 3 children together. Initially, everyone who knew Tony spoke highly of him, never knew him to be violent or angry, and overall said he was a good person. However, something would change behind closed doors of Tony and Latrice's marriage, and things would get violent. Very violent. The last fight Tony and Latrice were known to have, Tony beat Latrice so badly that she broke her jaw and had to have it wired shut. Because of this, Latrice was given an order of protection, or as we commonly refer to it as in the US, a restraining order against her husband. Now, we all know that a restraining order is just a legal filing, a piece of paper. And many people are known to break the restraining orders. It can't stop somebody from approaching you, especially in domestic cases. Shortly after that fight, Latrice made the decision to move to St. Louis, Missouri to live with family, get back on her feet, and get away from her husband. She was going to file for divorce and custody of her children, and she was going to try to move on with her life. On July 28, 2012, Latrice was almost done with her move to St. Louis. The last fight she had had with her husband, Tony, had been the final straw. She was not going to be moving back to Memphis, Tennessee, and she knew she needed to provide a better life for her sons. She had been granted temporary custody of her 3 boys, and this wasn't sitting well with Tony. July 28th was the day that she left St. Louis and headed back to Memphis to pick up her youngest son. She was seen with Tony that day around 11 o'clock a.m., but after that time, the family was unable to reach her. She wasn't supposed to be with Tony. He did have that order of protection, but if no one reports it or Latrice herself doesn't report it, it's likely authorities wouldn't even know. The silence from Latrice, however, continued, and the family was becoming increasingly worried. On July 30th, 2012, Latrice's family officially reported her as missing. As authorities investigated Latrice's disappearance, they discovered that she had been last seen with Tony, her husband. Law enforcement determined that this did indeed violate the protection order Latrice had against him, and they went looking for Tony, found him, and arrested him. He said he had no idea where Latrice was, however. Detectives weren't turning up many leads on her whereabouts either, that is, until the following day, July 31st. Her abandoned car was found discarded and burned near Little Simmons Road in Clarksdale, Mississippi. This was about an hour south of Memphis, Tennessee, the opposite direction of her route back north to St. Louis. Her car yielded no clues, however, but everyone now feared the worst. Her family knew that Latrice would never abandon her children. She would never take off and leave them behind. If she had been running for her life and was hiding, why was her car found burned down in Mississippi? None of this made any sense. And add in the fact that Latrice was diabetic and required daily medication that she didn't have. Finding Latrice was now possibly a matter of life and death. Despite the urgency of the matter, Latrice was not found, nor were there any clues that would lead to her whereabouts, or even what happened to her. Authorities did believe that Tony knew more than he was saying, but he maintained his innocence in her disappearance, and there really was nothing more law enforcement could do to hold him. They just didn't have the evidence. He would have to be released. Latrice was last seen with Tony on Springleaf Lane in Memphis. This is a residential neighborhood on the southeast side of the city. Springleaf Lane to Little Simmons Road in Clarksdale, Mississippi is about 80 miles. Little Simmons Road looks to be, in part at least, a remote dirt road on the outside of the city of Clarksdale, making it a good dump spot for someone getting rid of or burning a vehicle. I am curious, did Tony or Latrice have any connections to that area of Mississippi? Why did her car end up in Clarksdale? We know that Latrice was from Crenshaw, Mississippi, but Clarksdale looks to be about 40 miles south of Crenshaw. It is pretty well known, at least here in the United States, that Memphis, Tennessee has one of the highest crime areas in the U.S. However, in this case, I don't know that that matters. Latrice, a family-oriented and doting mother, would never leave her family. She would absolutely never leave her children behind. Although authorities continue to suspect foul play, the family does have to hope for the best. They are raising Latrice's children who talk about their mother every day. Latrice is described as a black female standing 5 foot 2 inches tall and weighing around 160 pounds when she disappeared in July of 2012. Latrice was 38 years old then and would today be 51. She has brown hair and brown eyes. Latrice often goes by her middle name Shay. Her ears are pierced, and she has a gold tooth, her right lateral incisor. She has a few tattoos, a heart on her left breast, a blue rose on her right arm, a rosary around her upper left arm, 3 bears on her left shoulder blade, and a panther on her leg. Remember, Latrice is also diabetic and had a broken jaw when she disappeared. Anyone with any information on the whereabouts of Latrice Armstead is asked to contact the Coahoma County Sheriff's Office at 662-624-3085. There is a national hotline available for domestic violence victims as well. If you or someone you know is in a potentially dangerous domestic situation, you can call 1-800-799-SAFE. You can text START to 88788, or you can visit thehotline.org. Thank you for listening to Latrice's story today. We don't know a lot about her case, but we do know that a mother went missing under very suspicious circumstances and left behind a family that loves her very much, including 3 young sons. The main person of interest has never been charged in anything to do with Latrice's disappearance. I am curious to know your thoughts. Do you think we have an obvious answer here as to what happened to Latrice? Or do you think another theory or possibility is likely here? John Adam Brewer Jr. was no longer an active captain in his local sheriff's department, but the thought process of an officer of the law never really changes. In 2011, John, having some type of mental episode, believed that his neighbor was a wanted fugitive. John also believed that he was a U.S. Marshal. He was not. And he believed it was up to him to capture his neighbor and bring him in. The incident, as you can imagine, didn't go well, and John ended up shooting at his neighbor, injuring him. Luckily, the neighbor survived the shooting, but John, of course, would be arrested. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity, and he was sent to the Middle Tennessee Mental Health Institute. In early May of 2013, John was released from the hospital and was sent to live in a halfway house in Nashville, Tennessee. Just a few days after his arrival there, however, something odd happened. John woke up before breakfast and called for a taxi cab. The cab driver took him to Pegram, Tennessee, where John was from, and dropped him off at the Community Bank and Trust. There was a confrontation at the bank, which ended with the local police being called in. Law enforcement showed up to the scene 10 minutes later, but John was gone. John hasn't been seen or heard from since. Where is John Adam Brewer Jr.? Hello, and welcome to the Where Are They podcast in a bonus episode, another unsolved missing persons case. The story of John Brewer is bizarre, and what I also find very interesting is that John, a former sheriff's captain, was never really given the time and attention from authorities. In fact, it would take years before he was even recognized as a missing person. Was this delay because of his mental health history? Why wasn't his case investigated immediately, especially since officers should have seen him as being one of their own, a former member of law enforcement himself? Authorities definitely dropped the ball on this case, and while now, 11 years later, it is doubtful that John is still alive, his children and grandchildren want answers. They deserve answers, and so does John. John Adams Brewer Jr.'s life is a bit of a mystery. He did have a career in the Davidson County Sheriff's Department in Tennessee, and he did have 3 children. Davidson County is located in Middle Tennessee and includes the city of Nashville and the surrounding cities and towns. John made it up to the ranking of captain, the designation that follows lieutenant. After retirement, John continued to live and reside in Pegram, Tennessee, which was located in the neighboring Cheatham County. This will become important when it comes down to his missing person investigation. Cheatham County is about a 20-minute drive from Nashville, Tennessee, so it's still fairly close. It's often been named one of Tennessee's most favorable places to live due to its proximity to amenities, cost of living, and safety. In 2011, for reasons that are still unclear, John developed some significant mental illness. Law enforcement officials are 19% more likely to suffer from mental illness compared to the general population. They do have a higher risk of depression, anxiety, and PTSD. This, of course, is due to the fact that they are continuously, over and over, exposed to high stress situations and often are witnesses to traumatic events. We don't know exactly what John's medical diagnosis was, but his illness was severe enough he began having delusions. He believed his neighbor was a wanted fugitive, and he identified himself as a U.S. Marshal. Neither of these was true. John fully believed this, however, and confronted his neighbor with the intention of capturing him. He thought it was his job as a U.S. Marshal. The neighbor would end up being shot, and John would be arrested. Thankfully, the neighbor survived the attack. John would go on to be found not guilty by reason of insanity in 2011 and was sent to the Middle Tennessee Mental Health Institute. This is a psychiatric hospital located right in Nashville. During this time, John also had strained relations with family. These relationships seemed troubled prior to the incident, but family has since come out and said that they believe his mental illness had actually begun much earlier and played a role in impacting their relationship. In early May of 2013, John was finally released from the institution and was sent to live at a halfway house in Nashville. Just a few days after moving in, however, John did something strange. He woke up before breakfast and called for a taxi cab. John took the taxi to Pegram, Tennessee, where he had been living prior, and he was dropped off at the Community Bank and Trust. Once inside, he approached a teller and originally asked to withdraw $200. John did have an account at this bank, and he had plenty of money in his account. He then asked to speak to another employee at the bank, someone that he knew, but the woman couldn't come out and speak to him right away. This upset John and caused a bit of a scene. At this time, he changed his mind and asked for $500 instead of $200. Again, he had plenty of money in his account, so this was not an issue. His behavior, however, was becoming problematic. Finally, the woman did come out and speak to John, but John was already worked up by this time. While he took his money, he asked this woman if she could give him a ride somewhere. She said no, she couldn't. She could not leave work. It's interesting. We don't know exactly where he was asking to go, which I think could be a clue in this case. With this woman refusing to give him a ride somewhere, this further irritated John, and bank employees called the local police department. John walked out of the bank minutes before law enforcement showed up. The policeman that arrived on the scene took the report and believed that John had just been a disgruntled customer, and since he was no longer at the scene, there wasn't much else they could do. Plus, they kind of believed the issue had resolved himself. He was causing a scene, the bank wanted him to leave, and he left. Of course, no one realized at that time that that would be the last time John Brewer Jr. would be seen. They didn't realize that John had vanished into thin air. Now, it's also unclear who initiated the original call to authorities to try and report John missing. His family was pretty much estranged at this point, so I'm thinking it was likely someone from the halfway house or whomever John was supposed to be reporting to. But there was a problem. Even though John had been living in Nashville, the Nashville Metro authorities said the report had to go through Cheatham County, since that's where he was last seen. Cheatham County didn't want to take the report because John didn't reside there. He resided in Nashville. It would actually be 3 years before an official report was filed. If there were any clues, sightings, or answers as to what happened to John that day right after he left the bank, they'd be a lot harder to find now, 3 years later. His family became involved eventually, hoping and searching for answers. But sadly, they continued to get the runaround also. No one wanted to take on this case, and no one felt it was their responsibility. John disappeared in 2013. A report was finally taken in 2016, but it would be 2019 before a new detective came on the case to try and get some answers. He reached out to the taxicab company for any information on John's ride to Pegram and if he had possibly left the bank in a taxicab. But sadly, they informed the detective that they don't hold on to records that long. I mean, by now it had been 6 years since John vanished. Because of the length of time that had gone by, clues were few and far between. Authorities and the family continued to battle over what could be done and what was being done. The odd part to me is it always seems law enforcement sticks together. John Brewer Jr. was one of them. Didn't they owe it to this former sheriff's captain to find out what happened to him? Or had his mental illness caused such a break between everybody? Why didn't anyone want to investigate his disappearance? Why has this family had to fight so hard to even get a callback, to even get an official report filed? John's children eventually inquired about getting TBI, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, involved in the search, and they were told that they had to be invited by either law enforcement or the district attorney. Neither have been willing to ask the TBI for assistance on this case, so they have never helped in this investigation. In recent years, with new detectives popping in here and there and taking a look at the case, the family has on occasion become hopeful. But each time, the hope is quickly replaced with disappointment. It seems when the investigators can't find any answers, the case is simply put to the side once again in favor of more recent cases. Will John's case ever be solved? Will we ever know where he went when he left the bank? I think it's possible either John will be found or because someone comes forward with some crucial information, such as where John went that day or who else may have seen or interacted with him. We just need that missing piece of the puzzle. Someone out there might have the information that could lead to answers and they don't even know it. John is described as a Caucasian male standing 6 foot tall and weighing around 215 pounds when he was last seen in May of 2013. He has gray hair and brown eyes. John has a scar on his head and a tattoo of his nickname Johnny on his upper left arm. John also has a history of troubling behavior and mental illness. Anyone with any information on the whereabouts of John Adam Brewer Jr. is asked to contact the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department at 615-862-8600 or the Cheatham County Sheriff's Department at 615-792-2021. Since his disappearance, John now has 3 grandkids that he has never met. The kids still talk about their missing grandpa. His family has also set up a Facebook group. Please go give that a follow and show your support to the family. You can find that at Missing John Adam Brewer Jr. Thank you for listening to John's story today, and thank you for being a supporter of our show. Let's keep working together and get these missing person cases resolved and bring the families the answers that they so desperately need. Someone out there just might know something. We will be back again very soon with another unsolved missing persons story. And until then, stay safe and hug your loved ones.